How do you rebuild a life when the world thinks you already have everything? This is the untold story of Keith Urban, not the superstar, not the headline, but the man who lost almost everything, faced the truth he'd been running from since childhood, and discovered that the greatest comeback isn't found on a stage, but in the quiet moments when no one is watching. He was standing by the lake, the way people stand when they are too tired to hide their feelings anymore. There was no noise around him, and the quiet made him face thoughts he had pushed away for a long time. In this calm moment, he felt something he had been avoiding for years. It was the truth that comes only when a person finally stops running. Keith Urban had lived most of his life in loud places, stages, airports, tours, studios, but now he was here, alone, trying to understand how everything had changed so fast. He looked older, not in a bad way, but in a way that showed he had carried a lot on his shoulders. His face was softer, his eyes tired but still kind, as if he had walked through many difficult years and was still trying to stay gentle. The house behind him no longer felt like a home. It was big, quiet, and full of memories that hurt more than they comforted. He had bought this place with love, thinking it would be a safe space for his family. Now, it felt empty. The rooms that once held laughter and small everyday moments were silent. The things his daughters left behind, drawings, toys, little notes, reminded him of how different life used to be. His music studio, which once gave him energy and purpose, now felt like a room he avoided. His guitar sat beside a song he had tried to write many times. Every time he picked it up, he stopped halfway. He felt like the music inside him had become stuck. For a man who had written hundreds of songs, this feeling was unsettling. It showed just how much he was struggling to hold himself together. As he stood outside, he spoke quietly to himself. These weren't dramatic words, just honest ones. He said things he never said in interviews or on stage. He admitted that fame had left marks no one could see. To the world he was confident, talented, and always smiling, but inside he was carrying pain he rarely talked about. One of the hardest truths he finally spoke out loud was about his daughters. 59 days a year, he whispered, feeling the number like a wound. Not even a big emotional breakdown, just a small, painful crack in his voice. He was not angry at anyone, he was simply heartbroken. Being a father had changed him years ago. Without his daughters' voices filling the house, the silence became too loud. While he tried to stay private, the outside world kept talking. News articles mentioned his new music, possible tours, and rumors about his personal life. Some magazines created stories linking him to people he barely knew. Social media repeated things without checking if they were true. For the world, he was content, active, working, and maybe even moving on. But the real man behind the headlines was tired and confused. He was trying to understand himself again. He was trying to build a new life without breaking apart. What people saw online was only the surface. They didn't see the nights when he sat in a quiet room asking himself who he was without his family beside him. They didn't see how fame became a cage he couldn't step away from, even when he needed space. There were moments in recent months when he felt lost. Not lost in the sense of losing direction, but lost in the sense of losing himself. He had spent years being Keith Urban, the superstar, and sometimes he forgot how to be simply Keith. Away from tours and fans, he felt strange in his own life. He wondered what kind of man he had become. He wondered if he had done enough as a father, as a husband, as a person. These thoughts didn't come all at once. They came slowly, during nights, when he walked through the house without turning on the lights, or mornings when he sat at the table and couldn't bring himself to pick up his guitar. He wasn't having dramatic breakdowns. He wasn't yelling or crying loudly. His pain showed up in small ways, avoiding phone calls, taking slow steps, staring at messages before replying. The kind of exhaustion that builds up after years of holding everything together. He felt pressure to act strong because millions of people admired him. But inside, he felt fragile. The hardest part was pretending nothing was wrong, when everything inside him was changing. He didn't want sympathy. He just wanted space to understand how to move forward. Everywhere he went, someone had an opinion about his life. Some said he was working too much. Others said he was dating again. Some said he was fine. None of them knew what he truly felt. He had spent years giving the world his voice, his songs, his performances. Now, he wasn't sure what he had left to give. The thought of starting a new chapter at this age scared him, not because he doubted his talent, but because he doubted his heart's strength. He knew he could still sing, still perform, still create, but being emotionally open again felt nearly impossible. Standing by the lake, he realized how far he had drifted from the person he used to be. He used to be hopeful, energetic, excited about the future. He used to believe that anything broken could be repaired. Now he wasn't sure. He felt like life had taken big pieces of him, and he wasn't sure how to put them back. He also knew that pretending nothing was wrong wouldn't help him anymore. This moment, quiet and simple, was forcing him to face everything he had pushed away. It was the first time in a long time that he allowed himself to feel the full truth. And yet, even in this heavy moment, something inside him was opening. He understood that the only way forward was to accept what had happened and look back at where it all began. Because the story didn't start with fame or awards. It didn't start in Nashville or Sydney. It started long before all of that, with a young boy in a small Australian town who learned that dreams require sacrifice and that every success carries a cost. Before this moment at the lake, before the divorce, before the custody ruling, before the silence, there was a boy who learned the world's hardest lesson too early. Greatness always demands a price, and Keith Urban had started paying that price long before anyone knew his name. Keith Urban's story began far away from bright lights or big stages. He grew up in Caboolture, a small town where people worked hard, lived simply, and rarely talked about big dreams. Life there was plain and modest. Most families focused on getting through the week, paying bills, and keeping food on the table. The Urban family was no different. Their home was small, but it was filled with warmth and belief. Even though money was always tight, the house held something much bigger than comfort. It held a dream that didn't match the size of the town. That dream started the day his father, Robert Urban, brought home a cheap little guitar. It wasn't new, it wasn't shiny, and it definitely wasn't expensive. But Robert gave it to Keith with a look that said, "This might change your life." His mother, Mary Ann, understood it too. She supported the dream even when it cost more than they could afford. Keith didn't treat the guitar like a toy. From the beginning, he treated it like something important. He practiced every day, even on nights when the electricity went out. The family couldn't always pay all the bills on time, so sometimes they sat in candlelight. Instead of stopping, Keith kept playing. He leaned toward the guitar, shadows moving on the walls, learning chords again and again. It was during these quiet moments that he realized music made him feel different, stronger, safer, more alive. It was a feeling the other kids around him didn't understand. At school talent shows or small local events, the other boys joked around or treated it lightly, but Keith walked on stage with purpose. Even the fluorescent lights and sticky floors of those small halls felt like opportunities to him. He wasn't showing off. He simply felt something inside him that he couldn't explain. His parents saw that spark long before anyone else did. His father worked long hours, often coming home exhausted from running the family shop. Still, he would drive Keith across Queensland to small gigs, sometimes late at night, sometimes after working a full day. Those long drives weren't easy. The family didn't have extra money for fuel or travel, but they found a way because they believed in Keith's gift. His mother played her own part quietly. She bought cheap fabric and stones, and made his stage outfits by hand. Sometimes she sewed until her fingers hurt. She never complained. She wanted Keith to shine, even if he was performing for only a few people in a room that smelled like old beer. Her message was simple: if you're going to do something, do it with pride. From a young age, Keith learned discipline. He practiced until his fingers hurt. He wasn't forced to do it. He wanted to. He had hunger in him, the kind that comes from wanting something bigger than the life you were born into. By the time he was 14, he was already performing in clubs with adults. These were not glamorous places. The air was thick from cigarettes, the noise often rough, and the people there lived hard lives. But Keith watched everything. He learned how musicians carried their pain. He saw how music could lift someone up or completely break them. Some of the older players told him the truth, straight. Music saves you, but it can also destroy you. Keith didn't fully understand it yet, but those words stayed with him. Slowly, people outside of Caboolture began to notice him. He entered television, shows like New Faces and Have a Go. These shows weren't fancy, but they reached Australian living rooms. When he performed, people paid attention. They didn't just see a boy, they saw talent. They saw dedication. Invitations began to come in. More people wanted to hear him. His name started being spoken in music circles around the country. Then came an important moment: meeting Mark Punch, the man who became a mentor. Mark didn't treat Keith like a child. He didn't compliment him just to be kind. Instead, he told him something strong and honest. Talent is responsibility. Those words changed how Keith saw himself. It meant his gift wasn't just luck. It was something he had to protect, grow, and respect. It meant he couldn't waste it. As his skills grew, something else grew with it: the feeling that Caboolture was getting smaller, not physically, but emotionally. The town couldn't hold the size of his dreams anymore. He felt out of place, not because he didn't love his home, but because he knew deep inside that staying would limit his future. He wasn't trying to run away from where he came from. He was trying to run toward where he needed to be. His parents understood this too. They wanted him to reach the places they never could. Even though the idea of letting their son go scared them, they encouraged him gently, then strongly, because they believed that life had something bigger waiting for him. Keith started to feel the pull toward the outside world. He saw that Australia had opportunities, but not enough for the kind of artist he wanted to become. He needed a bigger challenge. He needed to grow in ways he couldn't if he stayed in Caboolture. This realization wasn't dramatic. It was slow and steady, like someone noticing the tide rising inch by inch. He felt grateful for everything the town gave him, but he also felt trapped by its limits. By the time he reached his late teens, the decision was clear. He had to leave if he wanted to become the artist he dreamed of being. He wasn't running away from his family or his roots. He was running toward a future he could almost see, but couldn't fully understand yet. It was a future filled with risk, uncertainty, and hard work. But it was also filled with possibility, something Caboolture could no longer give him. He packed his bags with a few clothes and his guitar, the same cheap one that started everything. He didn't know exactly what was waiting for him, but he knew staying would mean giving up on himself. His parents hugged him, proud and worried at the same time, knowing this was the moment they had been preparing him for his whole life. But the world outside Caboolture was bigger, harsher, and hungrier than anything he had ever known, and Sydney would be the first storm he had to survive. When Keith Urban moved to Sydney, he thought it would be the place that pushed him forward. He hoped the city would open new doors and show him a path toward a bigger future. But the moment he arrived, he realized Sydney was a world completely different from what he imagined. His first home was a tiny apartment above a loud street. The noise from traffic, people, and late-night bars made it hard to sleep, but he didn't complain. He accepted it because it was the only place he could afford. He kept his guitar case beside him when he slept, almost like it was the only familiar thing he had brought from Caboolture. It reminded him of where he came from and why he had left. Life there wasn't easy. He didn't know many people at first, so he took whatever gigs he could find. Some nights he played in small bars filled with smoke, where people barely paid attention to the music. Other nights, he played for groups who were too drunk to care about the talent in front of them. Sometimes the pay was so low, it barely covered food or rent. But he didn't stop. He showed up with the same energy every night, no matter how small or noisy the room was. This routine became his new life, and for a while, it felt like he was simply surviving. His days were just as intense as his nights. He rehearsed until dawn many times, especially when he had new songs he wanted to finish. Some of his writing sessions were at small kitchen tables, with cold coffee and barely any space for notes. He wrote with a mix of frustration and hope. Every song felt like a step closer to his dream, even though progress seemed slow. But behind the hard work, there was a constant pressure. He faced rejection often. Some places turned him down without even listening. Others didn't take him seriously. There were nights he walked home feeling defeated, wondering why things weren't happening faster. Yet, every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself that success was not about talent alone. It was about staying strong and not giving up, even when everything felt impossible. Eventually, he began forming connections with other musicians. He started jamming with people who understood the grind. He formed a band with a few of them, believing that teamwork might help them all grow. Their performances were filled with energy. Keith played with passion every time, trying to turn even the smallest crowd into believers. It wasn't sudden, but slowly, people started noticing him. They recognized the hard worker who always showed up, who played like he had something important to prove. This recognition wasn't fame, but it was a start. It helped him build a reputation in Sydney's music circles as someone reliable and talented. Still, building a name didn't make everything easy. The emotional weight of the struggle began to drain him. The loneliness he felt in Sydney didn't fade away with time. He had friends and bandmates, but at the end of the day, he went home alone, to a small apartment that didn't feel like home. He sometimes sat on the edge of his bed wondering how long he could keep going like this. He had big dreams, but reality felt heavy. The contour life he imagined filled with progress, growth, and excitement looked very different in real life. There were many quiet nights where doubt clouded his mind. He questioned his decisions. He wondered if he should have stayed in Caboolture, where life was at least familiar. He wondered if he was meant to do something else entirely. These moments didn't stop him, but they shook him deeply. Sydney was supposed to be a stepping stone, but at times it felt like a wall he couldn't climb. Still, he didn't quit. He kept performing and writing, even when he felt worn down. He knew deep inside that giving up wasn't an option. But as the months passed, he began seeing signs that Sydney might not be the place where he could grow to his full potential. No matter how hard he worked, the opportunities felt limited. The city supported him to a point, but there were moments when he felt boxed in. He felt like he was using all his strength just to stay in the same place. The more he struggled, the more he started hearing about Nashville. Musicians spoke about it like it was a different universe, a place built for people who lived for country music. It was a city where dreams were chased without apology. Keith felt something each time he heard the name. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a pull. He felt like Nashville was calling him, even though he had never been there. It felt like destiny, like the next step he needed to take. The idea of leaving Sydney scared him because it meant starting again, but staying scared him even more. He knew he couldn't reach the life he imagined if he stayed in the same place forever. Sydney had taught him discipline, strength, and survival, but he felt he had learned everything he could there. His heart kept telling him he had to move on, even though his mind warned him about the challenges ahead. He understood that Nashville would not be easy. He knew it was a city full of talented musicians, many of them better known and more experienced than him. But he also felt that he belonged there, even if no one else knew it yet. By the time he finally made the decision, it wasn't sudden. It was something he had been feeling for months. He packed his things again, not much more than clothes, notebooks, and his guitar. This time, he was leaving not just a town, but an entire chapter of his life. Sydney had shaped him, tested him, and almost broken him. But it had also prepared him for something bigger. He felt grateful, tired, and nervous all at once. But Nashville didn't care who Keith Urban was, and the city would make him prove he deserved a place in its heart. When Keith Urban arrived in Nashville, the first thing he felt was the cold. It was a different kind of cold than he had ever known, sharp and unfriendly. But what hit even harder was the feeling that nobody cared he was there. Nashville didn't welcome people with warmth or excitement. It was a city filled with musicians, dreamers, and hundreds of new arrivals just like him, all hoping to make it. Keith quickly realized that this city had seen thousands of talented people before him. Nashville didn't react to confidence, promises, or dreams. It reacted to results. Until you proved yourself, you were just another face in a crowd of hungry artists. He started from the bottom, quietly, anonymously. He became a session guitarist for hire, playing for anyone who would pay even a small amount. Sometimes he earned almost nothing, but he still took the job. He needed the experience, and he needed people to see how serious he was. He spent long hours in studios recording parts for other musicians. His name wasn't on the songs, but his guitar was. After studio sessions, he played at small venues, sometimes where only a handful of people showed up. He didn't complain. He was used to working hard, and he believed that patience was part of the journey. During these years, he wasn't just working, he was learning. He studied how Nashville musicians played, wrote, and communicated. He absorbed everything. Slowly, he started forming deeper connections. This eventually led to the creation of The Ranch, a trio made up of musicians who were just as hungry as he was. They played with raw energy, pushing themselves to be noticed in a city where being good wasn't enough. They had to stand out. For a while, The Ranch became his world. They practiced daily, played every show they could get, and tried to create a sound that felt strong and honest. Even though the band didn't achieve major commercial success, it did something more important for Keith. It put him on the radar. People in Nashville began talking about the kid with the fire in his playing. They didn't always know his name yet, but they knew his sound. They noticed the way he attacked the guitar, the way he played with emotion, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. That was the first sign that things were shifting. Still, recognition didn't equal stability. Keith went through some of the hardest years of his life during this period. Even with progress, he struggled financially. Rent was difficult to pay. He worried about how long he could keep going. There were nights he lay awake, wondering if he had misunderstood everything, if maybe the signs from his childhood, the encouragement, the sacrifices, were pointing him in the wrong direction. He wondered whether fate had tricked him into chasing something he wasn't meant to have. Loneliness hit him often. In a city full of musicians, he still felt alone most days. But Keith wasn't someone who gave up. He kept writing, kept practicing, kept pushing. He didn't allow self-doubt to control him. He reminded himself that talent alone wasn't enough in Nashville. Endurance mattered just as much. He had already survived Sydney, so he believed he could survive Nashville too. What he didn't know yet was that his turning point was much closer than he thought. Everything shifted around 1999. After years of pushing, struggling, learning, and proving himself, Keith released his first American solo album, titled Keith Urban. It wasn't released with massive expectations or huge marketing campaigns. It entered the world quietly, almost like he had. But the songs spoke for themselves. Listeners began paying attention, and country radio stations took notice. Then it happened, the song, "But for the Grace of God," started climbing the charts. Slowly at first, then steadily, and soon it became his first #1 hit in the United States. When that song reached the top, everything changed. America finally saw what Caboolture had seen when he was a young boy practicing guitar by candlelight. It saw what Sidney had seen when he was performing in bars and writing late at night. The voice, the guitar, the emotion, people connected with it. For the first time, Keith wasn't just surviving, he was rising. From there, momentum took over. More people wanted to work with him. More opportunities appeared. His music career began moving at a speed he had never known before. Life became a mixture of writing, recording, promoting, and performing. He spent long stretches on the road, playing to bigger audiences than he had ever imagined. The energy of the crowds was powerful, and the success motivated him. He felt proud, grateful, and determined to keep climbing. Every mile traveled felt like another step toward the dream he had been chasing since childhood. But the rise also brought new challenges. With more attention and more pressure, he felt the weight of expectations growing heavier. He wasn't just playing for small crowds anymore, he was playing for an entire industry that now saw him as someone worth watching. Doors were opening, but each new door demanded even more from him. His schedule grew tighter, the demands stronger, and the pace faster. Still, he didn't slow down. He saw success as a sign that everything he had gone through was worth it. He believed he was finally stepping into the life he had worked so hard to build. It felt like the world was finally recognizing him, and that pushed him to go even harder. But success had awakened something dangerous, and the fame that lifted him up would soon start tearing pieces away. When Keith Urban's career exploded, it felt like the dream he had chased for years was finally becoming real. His songs, "Somebody Like You," "Golden Road," and later, "Be Here," turned him into one of the most important names in country music. Radio stations played his songs non-stop. People who had never heard of him before suddenly knew his voice, his name, and his style. Concerts began selling out faster than he ever imagined. Magazines wanted him on their covers. Interviews, appearances, award shows, his schedule filled with things he once hoped for. The world was looking directly at him, and this new level of attention lifted him higher than ever. Life, at the top, came with a rush Keith could hardly describe. Standing on stage in front of thousands of people felt like being plugged into a powerful source of energy. When the lights hit and the music started, the crowd responded with a force that made everything else fade. People cheered as if his songs were the soundtrack of their lives. Fans cried, sang along, and reached for him, making him feel appreciated in ways he had never experienced before. It wasn't just admiration, it was a kind of worship, and Keith felt that deeply. The applause became something he leaned on. It made him feel alive, important, and understood. Every show felt like a high. The louder the crowd got, the more he pushed himself to give them the best performance he could. There were nights when everything clicked perfectly. The band played tight, his guitar felt like an extension of his body, and his voice carried the emotion he wanted people to feel. Those nights felt almost spiritual, as if he was connecting with thousands of people at once. For a few minutes, every fear and insecurity he had ever felt disappeared. But the emotional crash came after the shows were over. When he returned to quiet hotel rooms, the silence felt strange and heavy. He would sit alone, hearing nothing but the low hum of the air conditioner. He often told himself he should feel grateful. He had everything he once dreamed of: fame, success, recognition, and the chance to touch people with his music. But inside, something felt empty. The applause didn't follow him into the room. The cheering didn't fill the silence, and he didn't know how to explain this feeling to anyone. Night after night, he tried to push away that emptiness. He kept telling himself that anyone in his position would be happy. He should have felt fulfilled. But instead, the quiet moments made him confront feelings he didn't want to face. The higher he climbed, the more pressure he felt to stay there. The more fans he gained, the more lonely he felt when the lights went off. He didn't want anyone to think he wasn't grateful, so he kept these thoughts inside. On the outside, he smiled, performed, and thanked everyone. On the inside, he was struggling. It was during this time that a shadow began to show itself. The signs of addiction didn't appear dramatically. It started quietly, almost softly, as he reached for something to help him deal with the emotional pressure. Sometimes it was to take the edge off. Sometimes it was to relax after long days. Sometimes it was simply to feel normal for a moment. He didn't think of it as a problem at first. He believed he had control. But slowly, the habit grew. The shadow hid behind the success, unnoticed by most people. He was the man everyone admired, but he was also the man trying to soften the sharp corners of fame. The bigger his career became, the stronger that shadow grew. It whispered to him when he felt overwhelmed. It waited for him in the quiet moments. Addiction didn't care how talented he was or how much the world loved him. It slipped into his life because he didn't know how to deal with the emotional weight he was carrying. Fame made him shine on the outside, but it also created cracks on the inside that he didn't know how to fix. Then, something unexpected happened. He met Nicole Kidman. Their connection felt natural and calming, like meeting someone who finally understood the chaos of public life. Nicole brought a sense of peace that he had been missing for years. She wasn't drawn to him because of the fame. She connected with him as a person. With her, he felt seen in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Their relationship gave him hope. It made him feel like he could find balance again. He felt love in a way that grounded him, something deeper than applause or attention. Nicole became a bright part of his life, and being with her made him want to be better. Their relationship grew quickly, but meaningfully. For the first time in a long time, Keith felt that maybe he could build a life outside of the constant noise of fame. Maybe he could find a stable future, something not based on stages or charts, but on connection, family, and trust. But fame doesn't let go easily, and it doesn't care about personal happiness. Even though Keith had found love, he hadn't fully healed the wounds he carried inside. Fame had shaped him in ways he didn't realize. The emotional damage from years of pressure, loneliness, and self-doubt didn't disappear overnight. Love helped him, but it didn't erase his inner struggles. The addiction he developed didn't vanish just because he wanted it to. He had to fight it, and that fight would become one of the hardest battles of his life. He was caught between the life he wanted and the life his success had created. He was trying to be a partner, to be committed, to be present, but the old habits, the emotional cracks, and the demands of fame were still following him. He didn't want to let Nicole down. He didn't want to lose the peace he had finally found. But even a beautiful relationship can't repair damage that hasn't been acknowledged. And the life they built, beautiful, fragile, envied, would soon face storms they never saw coming. When Keith Urban met Nicole Kidman, it felt like life was finally offering him a chance to slow down and breathe. After years of chaos, touring, pressure, and fighting his own struggles, being with her felt calm in a way he hadn't known before. They understood each other's public lives, but more importantly, they understood each other's private pain. For Keith, Nicole brought a sense of safety. For her, he brought warmth and honesty. Their connection grew quickly because it felt natural, almost like something that was meant to happen. They built a home together, not just a physical one, but a space where they shared routines, laughter, and 2 daughters who became the center of dollars, their world. Becoming a father changed Keith in ways he didn't expect. He felt responsible in a deeper way. The love he had for his daughters was steady and unconditional, Holding them, teaching them, and watching them grow gave him a kind of purpose that went beyond music. Nicole supported him as he worked through recovery. She encouraged him, stood by him, and believed he could step out of the shadow he had been fighting for years. When he went into rehab, it took courage. He wanted to become better for himself and for the people he loved. The process was painful and honest, but it helped him rebuild trust with others and with himself. For a while, life behind closed doors was peaceful. Keith stayed focused on fatherhood, writing, and staying grounded. But even strong homes can crack in ways no one notices at first. Their schedules were demanding. Nicole had her career, Keith had his tours and studio work. At first, they managed it. They balanced travel, responsibilities, family time. But as the years passed, the balance became harder to keep. Work stretched their days. Longer separations became normal. They still loved each other, but the emotional connection grew quieter. When two people are busy in different worlds, even love can struggle to stay loud. The distance didn't happen with arguments or shouting. It happened quietly. It happened through missed conversations, rushed goodbyes, and tired evenings where neither had the energy to open up. The home they built remained beautiful, but something inside it had shifted. They didn't talk about it much. Sometimes people don't realize what's happening until much later, when the silence has already done the damage. In private, Keith felt this distance deeply. He tried to push through it, hoping things would return to how they once were. But emotional gaps are hard to close when the reasons behind them are subtle. Nicole felt it too. They were both working, both tired, both juggling, responsibilities bigger than themselves. Even love has limits when life pulls in different directions. By the time 2025 arrived, they were no longer able to ignore how far apart they had become. They weren't angry at each other. They were simply living separate emotional lives. Eventually, they started living in separate physical spaces too. What the world believed was a perfect marriage was quietly unraveling behind closed doors. The divorce filing on September 30th didn't come from one dramatic moment. It came from years of slow changes that neither could stop. When the papers were finally signed, Keith felt a pain he couldn't easily describe. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a life he had devoted 2 decades to building. He didn't blame Nicole. She was a strong and caring mother, someone who had always been there for their daughters. But the reality of the custody plan shocked him in a way he hadn't prepared for. When he saw the details written on paper, the number hit him like a weight he couldn't lift. 59 days. That was all the time he would get with his daughters each year. Not because he was unfit, but because their lives, schedules, and stability were built around their mother. The number didn't feel fair or unfair. It felt heartbreaking. He knew Nicole loved their daughters deeply and would care for them well. But knowing that didn't make the pain any lighter. He wasn't losing his children, but he was losing the daily moments that made him feel like a full-time father. He was losing the small things, school mornings, homework nights, bedtime talks, the pieces of childhood that don't return once they pass. As the news broke, the public conversation began. The media filled in the silence with their own stories. Some blamed touring, some blamed fame, some blamed personality differences, others pointed toward rumors. When whispers about Kelsey Ballerini began spreading, the situation grew heavier for Keith. People created their own versions of events. Photos, comments, and assumptions were turned into headlines. None of them showed what was actually happening. Behind the rumors, Keith was grieving. He wasn't chasing attention. He wasn't trying to move on. He was trying to understand how his life had broken in ways he didn't see coming. He kept most of his pain private. He didn't address the rumors. He didn't fight the stories. He focused on getting through each day. He leaned on music, but even that felt difficult at times. Writing songs when your heart feels heavy is harder than people realize. He tried to stay strong for his daughters, calling them, checking on them, making sure they felt loved even from a distance. But inside, he felt lost. The family he built, the love he believed in, the life he worked so hard for, it was all changing faster than he could process. Even with all of this going on, something deeper was happening inside him. He began seeing parts of himself he had never fully faced. The sadness wasn't just about the divorce. It wasn't just about loneliness. It wasn't just about the public attention. It came from a place much older, a place tied to who he had been since he was young. The emotions that surfaced were not new. They had been waiting for years, hidden behind work, success, and constant movement. The heartbreak only brought them to the surface. But the greatest revelation of Keith Urban's life wasn't about fame, love, or loss. It was about the one truth he had avoided since childhood. As everything in Keith Urban's life began to fall apart, he slowly realized that the biggest struggle he faced wasn't the divorce, the custody fight, or the rumors. It wasn't even the pressure of fame or the long years of addiction recovery. His real battle was much older. It was the boy inside him who never learned how to express feelings without turning them into music. Since childhood, he had relied on songs to say everything he couldn't say out loud. It worked for his career, but it hurt him in his personal life. He could communicate pain beautifully in a melody, but in real conversations, he often stayed silent. He didn't know how to talk about fear, sadness, or confusion without hiding behind work. This wasn't intentional. It was simply the only emotional language he had ever learned. Growing up, music became his answer to everything. When he felt lonely, he played guitar. When he felt scared, he practiced harder. When he felt too much, he turned his feelings into a song. Over time, he confused emotional avoidance with discipline. He believed that working harder was the same as dealing with pain. He believed that writing songs was the same as opening up, but it wasn't. Music helped him survive, but it also became a shield that kept people from seeing the real Keith. Whenever life got too heavy, he escaped into work because it felt safer. It was easier to sit in a studio for hours than to have difficult conversations. It was easier to write about heartbreak than to say, "I'm hurting." Even the people who loved him deeply never got to see the full picture of what he felt. He never meant to hurt anyone. He tried to be a good man. He tried to be a loving partner, a caring father, and a dependable friend. But sometimes being a good man isn't enough when you don't know how to show the emotions that matter most. Keith loved deeply, but he didn't always love well. He didn't know how to express need, fear, or vulnerability. He didn't know how to ask for help. He didn't know how to slow down long enough to listen or share. He thought presence meant providing. He thought showing up meant giving everything he had to his career, believing it would make life better for the people he cared about. But in reality, it sometimes made them feel distant from him. The invisible failures were the ones he carried with the most weight. After the divorce, something in him shifted. He understood that he needed to change, not for the world, but for himself and his daughters. He couldn't go back in time, but he could start showing up differently. He began calling his daughters every night, no matter how tired he was or where he was. These calls were simple, sometimes only a few minutes, but they reminded him of what truly mattered. He learned to be present in small ways, not just during big moments. He listened more. He asked questions. He tried to understand their feelings instead of rushing to fix everything. These nightly calls became the most important part of his day. He also began writing, but not for albums, tours, or the charts. He wrote because he needed to release emotions he had kept locked away. He wrote to heal himself, not to impress anyone. His songs during this time were private, personal, and sometimes painful. They weren't meant for release. They were meant for understanding. Music finally became something honest, instead of something he used to hide behind. It became a tool for self-reflection rather than escape. Keith also made his inner circle much smaller. He stopped surrounding himself with too many voices, too many opinions, too many people who needed something from him. He learned the value of quiet friendships, of people who cared about him as a human and not as a superstar. He found comfort in simplicity. Instead of filling his schedule, he created space. Instead of running from emotion, he learned to sit with it. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel things without trying to turn them into work. This was a slow process. Healing doesn't happen overnight. Some days were heavy, some nights felt long. But Keith did something he had never done before. He sat with himself. He didn't reach for distractions. He didn't drown his thoughts in noise. He faced the parts of himself he had avoided for decades. He reflected on his childhood, his habits, his fears, and the choices that shaped his life. He understood that success had always been easier for him than emotional honesty. Now, honesty was the only thing that could help him rebuild. As he spent more time alone, he began understanding what truly mattered. It wasn't the awards, the applause, the achievements, or the status. Those things were meaningful, but they weren't the foundation of a full life. What mattered was connection, real connection. Being there for his daughters, being honest with himself, creating relationships based on openness, not performance. He learned that presence wasn't something you give once. It was something you practice every day. Little by little, he started to feel a quiet kind of strength. Not the strength that comes from fame or recognition, but the kind that comes from knowing yourself. He began walking more intentionally, moving slowly, choosing carefully. After decades of running toward goals, running away from pain, running to escape the past, he finally stopped. He faced the man in the mirror, not the superstar, not the performer, but the person. And surprisingly, he didn't feel disappointment. He felt understanding. He felt forgiveness. He felt possibility. He realized that everything he went through, success, addiction, love, loss, had brought him to a place where he could finally understand who he truly was. He wasn't just the boy from Caboolture or the superstar from Nashville. He was a man learning how to live with clarity, honesty, and quiet strength. He wasn't healed fully, but he was healing. Yet even after everything, addiction, fame, love, loss, one final turning point waited for him at the edge of that quiet Tennessee lake. When we return to the lake, everything feels different now because we finally understand what Keith Urban has been carrying. At the start, it looked like a man simply standing in a quiet place, but now that we know the history behind him, the childhood struggles, the pressure, the loneliness, the mistakes, the love he fought for, and the loss he couldn't stop, the scene becomes heavier, deeper. He isn't standing there as a superstar. He isn't standing there as someone defined by fame. He is standing there as a human being who has lived through many chapters and is finally ready to stop hiding from himself. In that moment, he is not Keith Urban, the performer. He is just Keith, a man who went through fame, addiction, heartbreak, fatherhood, divorce, and self-discovery. A man who spent years running, only to learn that real strength sometimes comes from staying still. As he looked at the lake, he felt like he was finally breathing fully for the first time in years. The quiet didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt honest. It felt like a place where he was allowed to let go of everything that had been weighing him down. He started noticing the small things in his life again, details he had missed during years of noise, stress, and movement. One of those small things was his daughter's laughter. Every phone call with them, even the short ones, made him feel whole. Just hearing their voices brought him comfort. Their laughter reminded him why he needed to take care of himself, why he needed to live slowly and be present. He didn't get to see them every day anymore, but he cherished each moment he did have. That closeness didn't depend on time. It depended on effort, honesty, and consistency. Another small thing that returned to him was the natural rhythm of songwriting. For a long time, music felt heavy. It felt like a job or a burden. During the hardest moments, he couldn't even finish a song because his emotions were tangled. But now, sitting in silence, he felt melodies forming again, not for charts, not for a new album, not for expectations, but simply because music was part of his soul. In the quiet, he could hear ideas again, soft and real. He didn't rush them. He let them come slowly, naturally. It reminded him why he fell in love with music in the first place. He also began to appreciate simple mornings, waking up to the warm light of sunrise, hearing the world wake up slowly, feeling the fresh air. These moments became comforting. After decades of rushing from hotel rooms to planes to stages, learning to slow down felt like a gift. The sunrise didn't ask anything from him. It didn't need him to perform. It simply existed, and for the first time in his adult life, he let himself exist peacefully too. The outside world continued to talk, of course. There were still rumors about Kelsey Ballerini, whispers about whether he had moved on or whether he was starting something new. People created stories, posted online opinions, and tried to guess the truth behind every small detail. But Keith didn't focus on any of that. He didn't deny, and he didn't confirm. He wasn't hiding anything, he simply understood that love, healing, and rebuilding were private journeys. If something new was happening, or if nothing at all was happening, it wasn't anyone else's business. Romance, for the first time in years, was not at the center of his life. He was not trying to fix himself through relationships anymore. His priority was rebuilding the foundation he had ignored for too long, himself. He realized something important during these quiet days. Happiness was not found in applause, awards, or fame. Those things could lift you up, but they could also break you. Happiness came from presence, from being aware, from appreciating the life you have when no one is watching. It came from conversations with his daughters, from peaceful mornings, from simple meals, from friends who didn't want anything from him, and from allowing himself to be honest about his feelings. Real happiness didn't need big moments, it needed real moments. His healing became a slow process, but it was a steady one. He learned to walk instead of run. He learned to listen to his feelings instead of escaping them. He learned to take things one step at a time, without rushing for the next big achievement. For the first time in decades, he wasn't chasing success. He wasn't trying to stay on top. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was choosing slowness over chaos, clarity over pressure, and truth over performance. This was a rebirth, not dramatic, not loud, but quiet and real. Keith's comeback wasn't happening on stage or through an album. It was happening inside him. The comeback he never planned became the one that saved him. He wasn't becoming a different person. He was becoming himself for the first time. Every day he returned to who he was, before fame, before expectations. Every day he learned how to rebuild from the inside out. He didn't need crowds to cheer for him anymore. He didn't need the world's approval. What he needed was honesty, stability, and a life that matched his heart, not his title. Standing at the lake, he felt something he had been missing for years, a sense of peace. Not the fake peace he used to feel after a good show or a successful interview. This was real. It came from acceptance, from healing, from letting go of old pain, and from choosing a new way to live. He didn't know exactly what his future looked like, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He trusted himself. And before we begin the full story, before the cameras, the stages, the songs, the storms, there is one question we must finally ask.